when Andrew told me that he might be able to squeeze in a panel on topics about the future of work, I was more than pleased, as you might know, because we are running a project on that. So I was very grateful. And I think we have a great set of papers here. So it's really a pleasure to chair this panel. We'll start with Amir Anwar from University of Erfurt. Erfurt, that's my university. University of Edinburgh. That's the problem with my bad eyesight. University of Edinburgh, and he will talk about the hidden underbelly of Silicon Valley. So the floor is yours. I would suggest that you keep it to 15 minutes and we discuss the papers as a group. So basically, keep your questions for the final discussion, please. Thank you. And I give you a little bit of a heads up if you want.
That's okay, perfect. I don't mind coming to Erfurt, considering the financial conditions we have in Edinburgh. No, I'm joking. Good morning, everyone. I can already see constraint in space, and that's making me go, oh. Some of you might be confused reading what you call the program, which has a different title of the presentation. The title on the program book was an old one. I forgot to change it. But that's actually a title of a book. It's an open access book. See if you want to download it. I'm not going to bother you or bore you with that thing. But I will show you something from the book, just one thing. And I'm going to talk to you about something slightly different here. Well, not what's in the book, more or less generally. What you have in front of the screen are kind of 4 key sets of tools or services that everyone use pretty much on a regular basis. Who would tell me what is common between them? Take a guess. We don't have much time. Take a guess. Anyone? What would you say there is common between them? On the bottom left-hand side, there's ChatGPT. There is Amazon's what you call smart speaker, I think. There's a driverless car being trained. And on this, I tried to search my book. What is digital continent? And it gave me a summary of the book. So this is like an AI kind of a generated overview. What could be that join the dots between all of these 4 tools or technologies that we use? Go on. Data about what? About humans and their interactions, possibly. Okay. Anyone else? AI? They are AI tools. Yes, they depend on data. Anything else you might pick up? Okay, I'll move on. All of these technologies, they are AI tools. They are dependent on data. They're built around curation and training of data. But one of the more fundamental aspect of these tools is they are made in Africa. That's the most basic thing behind them. And where they're made are in shipping containers like these. But not actually this one in particular, but the origin was in shipping containers like this, which later became training centers, parts of Central and Eastern Africa. But what I want to do is not talk about these training centers. This is, by the way, in the book, that photograph. That's my slide for the book, Digital Continent. So I'm done with this. What I actually do want to talk to you about are the people who work inside those shipping containers, people like these. In particular, what I'm interested in, and this is the kind of the current project I'm doing, and the paper Hidden Underbelly of AI, it will be coming out in a special issue, hopefully next year, early next year. It is about the working conditions of these data workers within the continent, particularly in this case, Eastern Africa, but more importantly, the kind of mental and physical health impact these people face. Think about the kind of stuff that they have to look through to give you clean internet. Things like if you use Facebook or Twitter, you don't see child pornography. If you don't see any murder, if you don't see any violence, if you don't see bestiality, thanks to people like these, that we are able to see clean internet. The fact that tools that we showed you earlier, no matter what Google's, for example, I can go back to that slide. The top left-hand thing on the Google search engine are now labeled as AI Airview. About 4 or 5 years ago, if you Google any major thing, a city, a name, a book, there would be a small info box on the right-hand side. Google would put it on their website up until 2017 that this is automatically generated through algorithms. In reality was people sitting in this particular office, they were actually curating those boxes, correcting information. For example, if you search STIAS, that box will still appear. But the information contained is not automatically generated. It is sourced from internet by people like these. And in order to do this, it takes them time. But they also work in quite adverse conditions, which generate lots of mental health issues. And that's the topic that I'm going to talk to you about. I'm not going to bore you with the historical sort of origin of this kind of work, both in Eastern Africa, but particularly in Africa in general. It is in the book if you want to read it, but it's also written by a number of other people, and the work is currently ongoing. There is a lot to it. But one of the key elements behind this historical context is the launching of the landing of the fiber optic cable, which we couldn't go to see this time around, or the ship, but we will go to a data center. Anyway, the landing of the fiber optic cable in 2009, it kind of transformed the industry in East Africa, where it generated a lot of interest for firms, international firms, to come to East Africa to tap into the labor resource to try and set up IT services industry. So that's the kind of a very brief summary, but there is more to it, and I'm more than happy to talk to you later. But what is really crucial to understand here is that the data work done in Kenya or in Uganda or in Ethiopia, Tanzania, or in Ghana or in this country, there's a very succinct kind of a landscape that is emerging. And one of the way I can summarize it, much of the work, including data work or other kinds of IT services work, it is being done via subcontracting networks. What it essentially means is the firms based in the Silicon Valley in the US or in the UK or in Australia, they're not sending the work directly to the country, to the local firms. The work is getting subcontracted by other firms. These firms are this kind of the service providers based in India, Philippines, but also in the US itself. And they are the ones that are kind of creating subcontracting networks, what is essentially termed in economic geography or in kind of economic sociology as reintermediation. So the work isn't directly connected to the country, it is coming through different kinds of networks as well. And the other thing that is quite crucial to remember here is there is a kind of a lack of effective regulation. While the laws exist, they are not necessarily applied to that sort of proper level you would expect in a country, and that allows a lot of the work to get done under the surface rather than sort of known. What I'm trying to say with this, that this kind of an outsourced data work that is being done in the country, there is a kind of another very specific angle to it. If you look at particularly East Africa, there are some very well-known firms that are doing this work. For example, the BPO firm that you can pick up, Samasource, used to be a Samasource. It started in 2008 with centers in Kenya, but also in Chennai, expanded to Uganda. They were trying to set up something in South Africa, didn't work out. They closed the one in Chennai. Now they're called as Sama. It was a kind of a non-profit organization. Now they're fully transferred to being a full profit. Then Teleperformance, one of the largest IT outsourcing or BPO company in the world, based in, I think, headquartered in France. But there are also other local firms. The Kenyan local firms also exist. There are labor platforms, websites of firms that actually become a bridge or an intermediary to allow the work to get done directly by the workers. So if a client or a developer sitting in parts of Canada wants to do some of this work to train their model, they can actually tap into the workforce directly through some of these platforms like Appen, Upwork, or Fiverr, etc. So what we were interested in this particular project was to look at what, as I said earlier, what were the mental health impacts, what are the working conditions can we study to tap in to try and understand or quantify for the first time, at least from the African context, how are workers actually faring. So what we did was we developed a survey in partnership with data workers. Two of them are the co-authors on this study, which you saw the name Mofato Kwini and Richard Mathenge. They're both ex-data workers. They're both activists now, trying to organize it. And then we piloted the survey up earlier in January this year with some data workers in their network to figure out the questions, but we also discussed the survey questions with them. We then distributed the survey directly to the workers through these networks, primarily through WhatsApp, but also through LinkedIn and other sources that we can actually capture as much as we can. We didn't pay for the survey, partly because what happened in my previous experience when I did the work in South Africa, where I'm studying Uber drivers in South Africa and the US in partnership with Cornell, the problem was as soon as we paid the survey, we got a lot of false data, where people were filling in the survey because there was a lure for money. I ended up doing an interview late last year in November after the survey, when I would ring the people who had filled in the survey, look, you filled in the survey, can we have an interview? We would like to talk to you about this. Who are you? And we realized they actually have never worked on Uber. In many cases, people found the link through friends, and they filled it for them just to get the money. So this time we didn't. So overall, we got about 219 people to fill in the survey within 3 weeks, which was really good. We cleaned up the survey. About 122 responses came out to be usable, which I'm going to talk to you about later. And about 2 weeks ago, I was in Nairobi when I did quite a lot of interviews and focus group discussions, not just with our co-authors, but people. One of them is going to be speaking after this, Kauna Malgwi, for example, who is also an activist, and she's one of the head of the African Content Moderators Union chapter. But most importantly in this paper, we also are trying to bring in the voices of the workers themselves through autoethnography. As I said, people who have done the work, they know better than I do. So why not just try and see if we could actually be able to bring their experiences far more than in ordinary studies, maybe. In a sense, I'm going to go through quickly some of the slides and make some observations to it, and observations to the kind of the future of the work, primarily from the African continent point of view. As you can see from the survey itself, vast majority of the people are quite young. In most cases, they have either university education or some kind of secondary education to be able to do the work. But the most important point is, overwhelmingly, the population is female. And that is very much historically the case in the IT industry as well, despite the claim, or normative claim, that a lot of this IT work could be kind of quite equalizing and bridge the male-female divide. It hasn't really happened. What happened here? Oh dear. Anyway, I'll explain to you what it is. But I'm really sorry, I don't know what's going on here. But this is actually a pie chart of the kind of work that is being done within Kenya and Uganda, in this case, East African region. The vast majority of the work currently being done in East Africa is data annotation. And the way I could explain to you is, think about a driverless car. In order to train the driverless cars, they need to understand what's on the road. So the car companies, or the companies who are invested in it, they would send images of streets, primarily in the US, to these workers to label and tag them. That's just one example of them. A complex image with a lot of traffic, people, houses, pillars, sort of electric poles. It would take them up to 7 hours to tag just one image. And that's the kind of work what is categorized as data annotation, which is about over 50% of the work that is being done in the country. The second largest component is content moderation, which I talked about earlier, keeping social media clean, the internet clean, that's what it is. And the other work is what you call content generation, as I said earlier, about what you find on the search engine, but also transcription and sentiment analysis, but very tiny portion of it. This is a chart that actually tells how long people have been in the industry, and this is quite crucial, partly because of the claims that are being made, the sustainability of this kind of work, right, or the industry, and what it provides to the people. As you can look in the chart, these things are not really clear. So this is 2025 going up to 2010. Vast majority of the people, they stay about 3, 4, at best 5 years in the job. This is nothing unusual. This is the nature of the IT outsourcing industry since 1990. Companies don't want them for the long run because it costs them a lot of money, and they prefer to have a higher churn in the firm and in the industry because it allows them to capture cheaper labor and continue to be part of the business. One of the things we asked them was, what motivated you to be doing this kind of data work, so to speak? One of the most common thing was that they wanted better pay. Work exists in the region. The idea that there is no work, it's ludicrous at best, in my opinion. Work exists, it doesn't pay. It is not safe, it's not secure, it's highly insecure, and it's highly precarious. So people are looking for better pay just to be able to afford the basic necessities that you and I probably do in this room. At the same time, they're also looking for alternatives, because there is a combination of 2 or 3 work being done, and that's a longest standing trend, at least on the African continent, but also in some other parts of the majority world or the global south, where people do 2 or 3 different kinds of work or jobs in order to make an ends meet. You won't be able to see this, but the other one, the green sort of a thing, is where they're very keen to learn skills, and that comes from the part that a lot of the people were either university graduate, trying to graduate in the final year. They were keen to learn new skills so they'd be able to fit into the kind of the trend towards digitalization or within the labor market. So there was that another kind of a key motivation to it. Now what we try to do is to gauge some of the other quantified, some of the income kind of a thing. One of the key things that came out quite quickly was this is about 20,000 shilling, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, and kind of so on. A vast majority of workers, they still earn just about the minimum wage. Even though the minimum wage is not statutorily defined as part of the data work industry, minimum wage is roughly 17 to 18,000 shillings. Anyone from Kenya, please correct me if I'm wrong. It's roughly around this much, and that's for the clerical and teleworkers. That's written in the minimum wage regulation. Vast majority of the people, they depend on this income. About 90% of their income is generated from this. So there is an increasing importance of this work, which means they are forced into doing this work irrespective of what's coming next. In this case, when we asked them, are you paid enough? As I said, overwhelmingly large number of them said no. Some of them did say yes, and this actually could be a reflection that only 5 to 6% of the people in the IT outsourcing industry actually transition from being the very entry-level worker to something at the managerial position like team leader, quality analyst, or maybe the manager of the floor. When we asked them about the experiences of work, one of the more common ones, which is a little bit surprising to us at the time, is that they experience delayed payments. They don't get paid on time. Repeatedly, when I interviewed people, they would say, yes, they've had experiences the last 6 months, but they wouldn't get paid for 2 months, in some cases 3 months at best. But the second highest proportion was about high workloads. In this case, they would work consistently for 8-9 hours, but they would be called back to do some overtime as well. There were unrealistic deadlines, so client would come up, they need to get the work done very quickly, they would be under quite intense pressure to do this, and that leads to high intensity work, which is another thing that actually impacts their physical health quite a lot. Then exposure to traumatic content and the poor working space where they actually do, in this case, tools, computers. Mofat, who is an ex-data worker, when I first spoke to him, he said the place where he did content moderation work for about 1.5 years, it was a windowless room that was being separated from the main office deliberately to prevent the workers from talking to the other people in the firm, to kind of give you the idea of what it actually does to them. When we then started asking them about the physical and mental health more specifically, one of the key things that came out was vast majority of the people were either exhausted, physically exhausted, or they were under extreme mental stress. Extreme mental stress, partly due to the kind of the work they do, that they view in this case, the content that they view on the internet, if you're doing content moderation. But as I said, because of the high intensity, they're required to work consistently. In some cases, the firms were doing a split shift. So you come in for the morning because there is a large demand for work for the first 4 or 5 hours. You take 2-3 hours break, you would be going back home, but you come back in the evening to finish your shift. That kind of cycle continues. That leads to extreme exhaustion. But also conditions like vertigo, insomnia, eye problems were very common. Some people actually reported they were seeing the doctors because of the hearing problems, constant use of the headphones. We also asked them about the stress, and the frequency of which they face stress was extremely high. I interviewed 2 people. Both of them stopped midway to speak. They started crying, and these things are a reflection of what they've experienced very recently. One particular, in this case, was very adamant that she would not speak about the experience, so we had to talk about anything else. So we had to basically cut the interview and move on to some other things. In order to make matter worse, despite the presence of a kind of a person, of a support worker that could offer some support to the mental health, most of the people were saying there is some access to mental health support, but not to actually mitigate the kind of experiences they do. So I'm going to stop here, but I do want to make a couple of points here. Looking at these kind of conditions that we reported in the book as well, not statistically in this case, but looking at these kind of conditions allows you to question the kind of narrative that is being built around digital work, whether it is kind of a savior or silver bullet to solve unemployment, a lot of the issues. The argument we are trying to make is it might solve some of the unemployment issues, but it won't solve the issues about labor market transformation. In this case, the dysfunctional nature of the labor market in the country or in the region, it will continue, and to some extent, the propagation of this kind of work as it is expanding right now in the region and in Ghana, it might lead to worsening condition, but also long-term, we might have to question the long-term sustainability of this kind of work, which you would hear from World Bank and other organizations. I'm sure you'll have questions. I'm more than happy to take it, but I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you so much. This was really brilliant. I was very much impressed by this diverse approaches you also had and this insider's knowledge. We move on over to the next presentation by Kauna Ibrahim Malgwi from the African Content Moderators Union. Is he here? No? She's online,
Yes.
sorry. I wasn't aware of this. How do we do this with the, okay. So hi, nice meeting you. You will have the floor. Can you share your presentation?
Can you hear me?
I think we can't hear you yet, maybe. Now it's better. Yeah?
Oh, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. How are you doing? And I'm happy to be here. Good morning, everyone. I'm sure I've met a few people seated there. Yeah, so mine is just to have a brief presentation about a paper which I'll be working on soon. So the title, I've already spoken to Dr. Andrew. I would be able to share. So I'll just be speaking. And thank you, Dr. Amir, for sharing most of the experience. I think he has really said a lot that I would have said. So I will just be brief because he has said majority of what I will say. My name is Kauna Malgwi. I'm a chairperson of the Nigerian chapter of the African Content Moderators Union. I'm also the founder of Digital Rights and Mental Health Initiative. I'm a former Facebook content moderator. I worked for 4 years as a moderator here in Nairobi, Kenya. And yeah, I'm a clinical psychologist also in training. I'm a PhD student here in Nairobi, Kenya, doing my PhD in family and marriage therapy. So straight into my presentation, I'll just be talking about exploited and unseen, the digital colonialism, outsourcing, and the fight for fair tech labor in Kenya. So digital colonization is the modern extension of colonial logic through control of data, labor, and digital infrastructure by powerful tech corporations in the global north. In Africa, this manifests in economic dependencies, weakened local governance, and labor exploitation, which Dr. Amir have spoken about, the pay, especially in terms of the payment. And we've seen that in content moderation, in Kenya, as of now, we can see that the pay is really, really low. But when we speak to the outsourcing companies and all that, the first thing they will tell you is we are paying within the we're paying above the minimum wage. So Kenya is known as the Silicon Valley, a digital hub, yet its booming tech economy marks deeper inequalities. Content moderators in Kenya serve global platforms under exploitative conditions. So global platforms here means we have Facebook, TikTok, ChatGPT, among others. So our lawsuit against Meta underscores this imbalance. So currently there's a lawsuit happening in Kenya against Facebook, Sama, and the other parties in the case, which I will talk about in a minute. So content moderation involves screening disturbing content such as violence, hate speech, rape, suicide. Just think about the worst content you've ever seen, image, video, text that you've seen on your social media platform. This is what we do, filtering and taking them off those platforms. So workers are exposed to trauma daily with minimal psychological support. Yes, they would provide the normal mental health counselors who usually stay in the workplace, but usually those people don't even know what we are doing, because when we started the job as content moderators, we realized that even the counselors who were employed to offer support didn't know exactly the job that they were employed to do and the kind of people or I would say patients in a way that they would support, which really, really limited the kind of support that workers would get. Their emotional and mental health support needs are routinely ignored, which I just explained. So we'll talk about outsourcing and structural exploitation. So outsourcing firms in Kenya hire on behalf of tech giants like Meta, Dr. Amir just mentioned, companies such as Sama, Teleperformance, CCI, among others. So this system creates legal and moral distance, allowing companies to deny responsibility for the welfare of their workers. And we can see this really came out in the petition that we filed against Facebook, because Facebook kept denying that we are not their workers. They never know us. We don't have any contractual agreement or relationship with them. But we can see that in the job of moderation, we don't do any job for Sama. So Sama is just an agent, which the court also ruled that Sama is just an agent or a foreman, but the main employer is Facebook, Meta, which in other case I would apply also to other big tech companies. So contracts are often disempowering. So we can see that in the contracts, it never mentions who the real client is. The real client is, because you don't even know that you're being outsourced. The employment never mentioned any outsourcing arrangement. It never mentioned even that you're working for a big tech company. It just tells you you're just reviewing contents, blah, blah, blah. And also, we can see that immediately after joining after signing your contract, few days before now, you know that you're working for Facebook or TikTok or wherever, you're given a non-disclosure agreement, which literally takes away every power that you have as a worker to even sought for advice, legal advice, and also to understand what you're getting yourself into. So the case example is a petition against Facebook. So we filed a legal case exposing Meta's failure to protect we the workers' right in Kenya, and it highlights the contractual injustice, silencing clauses, systematic harm, lack of proper mental health care, lack of even job security, and a lot more. So it's not just a legal battle, it's a fight and for visibility and justice, because we can see this currently happening right now, even as we speak. We have a lot of content moderators working for Teleperformance who are facing, if not worse than what we had faced while working with Sama. And we can see that workers are constantly under threat of either losing their job, mental health issues, and all that. Earlier this year, we lost one of our colleagues who is a Nigerian who died under very strange circumstances while working as a moderator. And we can see that the issues surrounding that was issues of work permit and all that, because she couldn't travel when she really wanted to go home and she was found dead and all that. So it really shows us the urgent need for care for content moderators. Barely 2 weeks ago, we have 3 also Nigerians who their contracts were not terminated 1 day to their job, their contract renewal. So if their contract for one person, his contract was supposed to be renewed on the 25th of June, and on the 24th of June, he was told tomorrow is your last day at work, pack up and leave. And the next day, funny enough, he was at work on the 25th. His access, everything was just locked out. He was locked out of literally everything. He didn't have time to even say bye to his colleagues and all that. So you can imagine the mental health toll that would have on this individual, because as a foreigner, you've been here for 2 years plus. He has never had a work permit, always under the threat of being arrested. Sometimes they get arrested right at their gate, because sometimes even the caretakers, the guards will know that you are not a Kenyan, you're a foreigner. And then when you're arrested, the company just find a way of just getting you out of there. And then the struggle continues. So for the 3 guys that just happened barely 2 weeks now, that was how they were fired, 2 days notice. And that really shows us that things are not really getting better, as much as there's a whole lot of campaigns, I would say, talks around the working conditions. The employers are not even bothered about whatever that is happening. They just do it the way they do it. And in fact, it's getting worse, like I said, because maybe they feel we fire them today, they won't be able to get evidence against us from their workstations and whatever. We just block them out. It's quite unfortunate. And we talk about also the algorithm biases and cultural erasure. AI moderation tools misinterpret African dialects, cultures, and contexts. While doing content moderation, I started in 2019, and I will tell you till we stopped working in 2023, there are so many issues that we've raised with Facebook, telling them that in African cultures, in African dialects, in this African situation, or in this particular country's situation, like in Nigeria, we have content moderators when we're working from different countries, South Africa, Nigeria, and Rwanda, Somali, and so many other countries, and also languages. And Facebook will tell you this is a global policy. We cannot change it to fit the African culture. And then that makes us question, because I was in a conference in Senegal last year, and we're in the Meta Oversight Board presentations, and we could hear them saying that most of their users are from Africa. I think 70-something% were from Africa, are from Africa. And then we asked also, okay, the people in charge of the policies, what's the ratio there? And we realized that only, I think, 30% or so are from Africa. So where's the balance? It shows that the African culture, the dialects, the misinterpretations will always be there, which directly means it's going to harm the users from the African continent. Talk about even there's a cultural event in South Africa where women go braless or topless. Facebook will tell us to delete those contents, and it will be raised that, okay, this is a cultural activity, and hence it's not like a display of nudity. but Facebook would tell us, take it down, it's nudity. And hence you see a lady at the side of the beach wearing she's also topless because whatever she's wearing is a net. And he said a net means covered. So net means covered, that means it's purely naked for leisure, different from a cultural activity. But Facebook will tell us, take it down, we don't need the presence. And this is an example about among so many, or just to even talk about in Nigeria, where religion is a very huge aspect of our culture.
Sorry, just very briefly. You have 3 minutes. Sorry to interrupt. Yeah? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. So I was just trying to explain the algorithm biases and cultural elision. So this leads to censorship and digital marginalization, just like I've explained. So our voices are silenced algorithmically, and also a new form of digital imperialism. So the mental health and structural violence. So this is proven because we can see the petitioners who sued Facebook, which I am part of the petition. We all had a psychological evaluation, a mental health evaluation by psychiatrists, and it's a fact that all of us came out with PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, some depression, anxiety, among others. So lack of trauma-informed support replicates colonial disregard for African bodies and mind. So healing must be systematic and not optional. So we talk also about the digital severity and policy reforms. And this is something that is very key, even as researchers, and all to see how can there be a transparent contract, mandate mental health care, harmonize digital governance in Africa to help, and also data protection, because we've seen that the big tech companies just take data without even the consent of the workers. So the purpose will be to investigate how digital colonialism continues to manifest in Kenya through the exploitation of African tech workers or moderators working for big tech company, and to help understand how platform policies, labor outsourcing practices, algorithm biases, and insufficient mental health support collectively undermine African agency and perpetuate the systemic injustice in the digital economy. The research will adapt a mixed method case study design. We'll be able to interview at least 250. It's a qualitative interview of 250 former and current moderators based in Kenya. Their lived experience will inform a critical analysis of labor condition, contract structures, and psychological toll of digital platforms. The findings will be translated with legal documents from the ongoing petition against Meta and existing academic literature on digital labor, content moderation, and post-colonial technology ethics. So the findings, expected findings, will be the labor exploitation, OPEC, outsourcing structures, algorithm marginalization, mental health impact, among others. So in conclusion, Africa is just a labor source. We are architects of digital justice, from ghost workers to global activists. Like Dr. Amir have said, my colleagues Richard and Moffat, that is what we've been doing. And we must shape ethical technology rooted in equality and dignity. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Wow, this is really impressive. Also, thanks for sharing your own experience. That is really much appreciated. So thank you so much for your contribution. It also fits wonderfully with the previous one. Before we head into the discussion, here comes our last paper, which is by Adio, Dinika. And it's he's from the Distributed AI Research Institute, and it's on algorithmic plantation, digital colonialization, and Kenya's AI labor force. So please, the floor is yours.
Um, Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing well, even after this presentation by Kauna and also the one by Amir. Often, these presentations have a way of unsettling people. And I think that's actually necessary, that people should be unsettled, because the situation that we're dealing with here is truly unsettling. And I love how when Amir began his presentation, he took things where I say back to the source, because I think the conversations we had yesterday were beginning things from the middle. We were talking about algorithmic bias, we were talking about AI. But I think really where I think the conversation really needs to center on is at the beginning, where it all begins. When we are talking of artificial intelligence, where this really begins, or as Ngugi wa Thiong'o wrote, we need to go back, we need to find where the rain began to beat us. So I think, you know, the beauty or also downside of speaking after two great presenters who are talking about pretty much the same things is that you are either reiterating or maybe just, you know, just going through the motions. So I hope that you find this useful. So the title of my presentation is very deliberate, and I love that Kauna also touched on this idea of digital colonialism. So today I'm going to begin this presentation from November 30, 2022, which I think is the day where what we conceptualize as AI. If you remember yesterday I asked, how do you understand AI? What is it? So for many people, I think 30 November 2022 is when AI really became this concept we're all familiar with, because finally, if you're not a programmer and if you're not a techie, now you could understand it because it was not accessible to you on your phone, on your laptop. So ChatGPT was launched, and everyone was excited. I mean, now you had this little thing that could do magic, right? Write essays, finally write that poem you wanted to write to your beloved but couldn't find the words because you're not Shakespeare. And however, when all this euphoria was gripping people and everything was going on, Billy Perigo was digging deeper, asking the important questions which I think we should be asking today. Who makes this AI? And where? And what he found was quite unsettling, that workers in Kenya, workers such as Richard and Moffat, whom Amir spoke about, and workers like Kauna, who spoke here, were getting paid $2 an hour to do this work. And I don't need to go into detail about what this work entails, but what I would do is share just one very unsettling fact. So, which one of the workers who did this work, King's Korodi, shared with me. And pardon my graphic language, he said, imagine seeing a child's pussy tearing because of the rape that she's been subjected to. And you are supposed to do this every day, 8 hours a day. So, as this was happening, I was also quite curious and asking these questions. And around this time, we began this project, the Data Workers Inquiry. You can visit the website, where we decided that we as academics, despite our shiny PhDs, cannot be the experts over the conditions of these workers. And borrowing from Marx's 1883 Workers' Inquiry method, that the workers can only be the experts of their own conditions, because they know it better. They don't need any sophisticated theoretical framework, because they are living these conditions, which is why I love so much presentations from people like Kauna, because she is not saying I heard. She's talking about her lived experiences. So in this project, we engaged people from, as you can see, all over the world, from the global south, or global majorities, I prefer calling it. But we also had people from the USA and Germany. And I'll explain why this is important, especially when we harken back to my understanding of, or my conceptualization of this as colonialism. So what we found out from this research is that all workers are exploited. But to borrow from George Orwell, not all workers are exploited equally. So basically, I realized when I came to this realization that perhaps there seems to be a pattern that I'm seeing here. I was like, let me travel right to Kenya where this is happening. and talk to people on the ground. So I can assure you, I had spoken to people like Richard and Moffat online, but when I arrived in Kenya, I realized that whatever I thought I understood was different. When I walked in the streets of Jamhuri, I had to put my picture there for control. When I realized where these people lived, were coming from Ethiopia, running away from a war in Tigray, to come and moderate content in Kenya about the war they have escaped from, including Abel Abraha, one of the moderators from Tigray, finding his cousin's dead body during his work. Was he given time off to go and mourn? No, we need to be productive. Move on. So already, I won't get deeper into this because Kauna did a marvelous job of describing the trauma and what they went through. But what I'll do is I'll explain that what I conceptualize as this form of algorithmic colonialism manifests in 3 key ways. The first one is racialized geography of this labor. What I mean by this is that as workers, like Kauna have already explained, that the worst forms of content moderation work is directed towards the global south, towards Africa. Why? Because perhaps you're smarter, you are tougher, and this sounds quite familiar if we go back a couple of 100 years. Some people were deemed stronger, tougher, could do the harder work. And what you find also very unsettling about this is how women content moderators were assigned to deal with rape. Because, you are women, you are familiar with rape, so you can moderate this content. And I hope you can see how egregious this kind of practice is. And workers in the global north, in America, in Germany, we are assigned what is called policy work. This is the data they can curate, policy work, like what Kauna was describing, that, okay, they're the ones who decide, this is culturally relevant, this is not culturally relevant, but the hard stuff, the deep stuff, the unsettling stuff, the traumatic stuff, Africans can deal with that. And also the payment system. In America, workers doing data work get paid $15 an hour, $25 an hour, but in Kenya, $2.10 an hour is fine. It's above the minimum wage, right? Right? So the second issue is a form of algorithmic surveillance that goes on in this system. So what I mean is, number one is the concept of mathematical cruelty. I won't read all of this because I have confidence in your ability to read. What I mean is these workers are not given, so they should be doing this very fast, as a matter of seconds. As a matter of seconds, this is how you do it. Bathroom breaks, they are deducted. So if you work for 9 hours a day, if you go to the bathroom for 10 minutes, we add that to your shift. If you look away, because when you see traumatic stuff, all of us will look away, right? That is a productivity failure. We'll add those extra seconds to this. And when we analyze your performance metrics, that moment you looked away is a productivity failure. And so there is this form of what I would call algorithmic gaslighting, where this algorithm is your boss. You do work, it's rejected. You're not told why it was rejected. And sometimes you do this work and you think you have done well. Your human supervisor says, this is good work. The algorithm says, nah, and you don't get paid. And don't think for a second that they delete what you have done from their server so that you redo the work. No, they keep it. And sometimes when your payment is expected, they disappear. As remote tasks did in Kenya, they just woke up one day and they were gone. And workers lost an estimated $87,000 from this disappearance. So there is no form of appeal whatsoever if the system, I like how they use this word, it's the algorithm, it's the system. And when the system says your work is substandard, that's it. You don't appeal. Appeal to who? To the algorithm? How? So the third mechanism, which also Kauna explained, is the concept of corporate deniability or plausible deniability. So I think Amir explained that there are BPOs which operate, as well as independent labor platforms. So what happens through all this is that there is the concept that workers explained to me as the concept of many bosses. So now, who do you really work for? Do you work for Facebook? Or do you work for Sama? Also, do you really work for, if you're working for Sama, are you working for Sama or are you working for Volkswagen, the German company that is making you is making you label the streets of Hamburg, Germany. So who really is your employer there? What that means, therefore, is that when issues hit the fan, who then takes responsibility for you? And Kauna explained this very well. And the other concept is the concept of non-disclosure agreements, which I keep referring to Kauna because I'm also working with her in the Data Workers Inquiry Project. Kauna explained that there's a situation where you're unable to talk even to your therapist because you have an NDA. And Moffat also explained how he was facing issues with regards to the pornography he was seeing every day. And they were affecting him physically and at home. But he could not talk to his wife about this because he signed an NDA. So now you are behaving funny, you are unable to perform your duties, and your partner asks, what's happening? And you can't talk about it because that means you go hungry. So, to quickly move on, as I feel that time might no longer be on my side, workers are not just taking this lying down, and I want really get deeper into this because, again, Kauna did an excellent job. But what I want to focus on is that workers are not taking this lying down. There's the African Content Moderators Union, Data Laborers Association, different forms of organizations that these workers are engaging in. But my favorite really is that, as I explained, that workers in Kenya were paid $2 an hour. Workers in the US were paid way more. So workers one day realized that, by accident actually, that when you put VPN and said your location was the USA, your income quadrupled. And workers were like, aha, let's do it. And they started doing this. And it spread, of course, like wildfire. And suddenly workers on remote tasks suddenly most of them were from America. And workers were now getting paid proper money. Now, this was trickery, right? This is not being genuine, right? But I'm sorry, I support this. If the system used a racialized form of payment system, a racial geographical form of payment system, and workers realize this, and they play the game using its own rules, can we fault them? I'm sorry, you can, I won't. And to go further, workers realized also when the system kind of got smarter, they now started demanding US Social Security numbers. And of course, the workers found a way, and they now also had those US Social Security numbers. And they were doing this on this platform. So I am really proud of these workers, and to show that they are not just resisting this form of colonialism. But I think, as also the presenters yesterday explained, how it's foreign entities, and Quet, in his analysis of South Africa, explained how US companies have this imperial architectural logic that they impose on these systems. I think we can conceptualize as workers being on an algorithmic plantation. And I think this language echoes back. And I know arguments can be made that, but data work happens everywhere. But really the thesis of my argument here is that in Africa, it takes a different form. So Kenya is called the Silicon Savannah. So why is this important? Why talk about Kenya as if it's the only country? It's because Kenya is called the Silicon Savannah. It's being presented, it's being touted as the best. And what that means is that whatever happens in Kenya is repeated across the continent. We know when things got hot in Kenya, they moved to Accra. We know they are in Gulu, Uganda. So that means unless and until they are stopped, and unless until we expose them, they'll keep moving, and there are 54 countries in Africa. And now they've gone to what, 3, 4? So they still have 50 to go. So also, the Kenyan president came out saying, are there people from Summer Source here? We have just signed into law a law that will make it impossible for people to sue you. And yet in the same country, the Kenyan workers, or the workers, had just scored a historic victory against Meta. So this, for me, echoes how we understand colonialism, where we're these colonial claques, these Africans were put forward as some form of, local leadership, when whose interests were they really serving? They were serving empire. And I'm sorry to say, I will support the Maandamano or the Gen Z demonstrations in Kenya, because I agree with them. Whose interests is this president serving? If he says he's passing a law which makes it impossible to sue a company which is exploiting people, documented, not anecdotal, documented evidence of exploitation. So as I conclude, dear colleagues, when I call for the abolition of this algorithmic plantation, I am not saying that this work is not important. As workers themselves have told me that we are the janitors of the world. This work is needed. The same way when people were saying, let's abolish the cotton plantations, they were not saying cotton is not important. They were not saying we don't need cotton. They were saying we still need cotton, but not with the same logics, with actual adequate pay for these workers. These workers require actual pay, require actual mental health support. They require dignity, to be treated as professionals, not as disposable workers. So the question I ask is, what side are you on? Are you on the side of exploitation? Are you on the side of AI hype, saying it's the algorithm? Or are you on the side of workers who are real people with real names? And I'm happy Kauna spoke to us today. She's real. She's not an AI-generated image. And to end, I think, with the meme that I love so much, we are now in an age where robots are asking us to prove our humanity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was one of the best panels I think I've ever assisted, both in terms of coherence, so all three papers really spoke to the same topic and they were so relevant and so touching at the same time. So thank you once again for all three authors, the two here and the one online. So we are now moving to questions. Do we have a microphone? Yes, maybe.
Thank you very much, the presenters. I have two questions.
Access. It's too short.
So thank you again to the presenters. I have two questions, one for Amir and the other for Kauna. For Amir, I just wanted to understand what were the kinds of specific skills, because I'm working on a project along that lines at the moment. What kind of specific skills were the entry-level BPO workers interested in? Or those that, you mentioned some people that were transiting from maybe their final year studies into the workforce. I would like to get your thoughts on that. To Kauna, you said you were doing 250 qualitative interviews. I just wanted to understand for my own learning as well. What's the rationale behind your number? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I have two questions for three of all of you. The first is related to the quality of life in the workspace, because it is a whole topic in sociology of organization. And I want to know what the difference between how workers in the 18th century fight to get a good work condition and what we have now in what you described in this context, for example. Because it's looking like we also have this kind of exploitation between people who control the capital and hand workers, for example. It's the same thing. But can you see the difference between these two kind of working conditions? That's the first question.
Do you mean compared to the historical thing?
Yes, yes. For example, in the factory, for example. And do you see the difference, or for you is the same logic? Maybe with just a little specificity, I don't know. So I want you to make this kind of historical comparison between and to know what changed in the digital area. And this is the first question. The second question is related about the fact that what is the place you give to the knowledge in the artificial intelligence, for example? you know, to make this kind of services run, it's not only about how we pay workers, it's not only about the topological power, what I'm called topological power, the fact that you have a company who based in the California and with local office in Kenya, you know, this kind of thing. So the capacity to act distance, not be present, but the capacity to influence in the large scale. And what I want you to explain is what kind of knowledge this kind of system mobilized to be possible. What kind of knowledge? Because to understand what does that mean AI in this context is also to know what kind of knowledge can produce this kind of thing, what kind of technological assemblages can be possible, can make it possible. And it is also at that point we can better understand what does that mean IE services. So that's my question. Thank you so much.
Maybe one more here.
Yeah, thank you so much for the enlightening presentations. This is really, really heartwarming and overwhelming at the same time. So I wanted to direct this question to all of you because the work is already being done. So we see that there's a lot of exploitation of, you know, the African labor in terms of, you know, these big tech companies. And I would like to perhaps briefly unpack just one project that we have in the Department of Information Systems at UCT, which is fair work in the gig economy. So you can Google that, and I see that the values that we are, you know, examining and also interrogating are the same as some of the issues that I had from the presentations. So I would like to ask if there are similar movements that are, you know, trying to, you know, interrogate the fairness of the gig economy workers in other spheres of Africa or other regions of Africa, so that maybe we can possibly have a discussion on whether these movements can consolidate and then move to a position where we present a unison front in terms of fighting this. Thank you.
Thanks. So, who wants to go first? Shall we give Kauna first? First of all, or shall we?
Maybe ask Kauna first, yeah.
Yes, please, Kauna. Do you want to react?
I wanted the two doctors to go first. That is fine.
Okay, fair enough. You can choose if you want to go first or whatever you prefer.
I will let Adio go first.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Kauna, for choosing me to go first because I wanted to go last, like the presentation that I did. So I'll be honest that I a bit of so with the question that was asked about the ratio, the logic of the difference between these the factory workers and the exploitation happening now within the same systems. So of course there are fundamental differences, but there are also similarities. So in terms of the similarities, I think it's the same. In my argument, it's the same colonial logic which was applied to this work. So we're particularly disadvantaged workers in different forms. So I think, as I explained, how the workers who do this work are selected, I think that points to similar logics of taking workers from the periphery and exploiting them for the benefit of empire, for the benefit of how Congo, for example, was looted of rubber, and then the workers there exploited, and of course with limb severe and stuff, and the profits migrated to Belgium. So I think the same logics can be applied to what we're seeing today. And then the other point that I will jump on is your question on fair work. I think the answer is, in my research, yes, there are movements. For example, the one that Kauna is part of, or is part of the leadership of, is one such movement, but now made of workers. Because while Fair Work is a commendable project, it's also more of a academic-led project than a worker-led movement. So while I appreciate the value of that, I tend to be a little bit more sympathetic to movements led for and by workers, because they are the ones who understand. But also, I believe in a hybrid situation where it can be the academics and the workers combined, which is why we created the Data Workers Inquiry Project, where we actually work with workers and not treat them as research subjects, but rather as the epistemic authorities. They are the best place to do this. And I'm happy that we have seen the movements like the Data Label Association, which came out of this kind of work, where they then were the ones who came to us academics and said, hey guys, we were thinking of doing A, B, C, D, but we kind of think we are lacking in points A to A, B, C, and maybe you can assist us. And then we step in that way and assist them. So I think something like that is happening. But to say they can be a united front, to be honest, I wish they could be a united front, and I really want it to be there. But what I'm already seeing from what's happening in Kenya, how already, for example, there's fragmentation among the workers, where there are so many organizations doing the same job. And while they are both valuable, I also would think they would better serve this cause if they are united. But then sometimes they have what Masipula Stole argued as struggles within the struggle.
Raymond's point about skills, if I got the second point right, but the first one easy to answer, most of the people who would come in to do this kind of work, they were driven to learn new kinds of entry-level digital skills, right? So you think about Microsoft Office. For them, that's the basic thing, but then there are other things involved as well. Because the seduction of this doing IT work, Jenna Burrell wrote a book in 2012 about the cultural kind of an image that emerged among internet users in Ghana. The idea was that the quote that she used was kind of a global village. So for people who are driven to this work, like Mofat in her was explaining that he was so seduced by the idea of seeing these people do this work, live in some of the more horrible conditions, but yet they were able to generate some form of money. There was flashy sort of clothes. And the idea was if you learn some form of IT skills, it doesn't matter which one, you would be able to transition. They were not driven to do one or two skills. For them, digital was seen as a word of entry to something better, if that makes sense. To your point about the comparison, which I think Adio has done really well, I would want to add a couple of more things to it. One of them is, as much as we would like to separate them, which is what Adio was saying, that they are two different workplaces, there is still a sort of a similarity in terms of the exploitation that goes. The forms of exploitation might have changed, right? So Jamie Woodcock wrote about this so if you read the research on call center industry or BPO industry, which is this like a later stage of it, they were talking about the exploitation of bodies to exploitation of mind. But what our work actually is showing, that isn't necessarily the case all the time. It's actually the exploitation of body and mind at the same time. So in order for people to say, just because you sit at home and do the work, it doesn't affect you physically, it actually affects you extremely more than, in my opinion, and I'll give you an anecdote to it. I interviewed a sort of a digital worker in Kenya in 2016, early 2017 in Nigeria. And I first interviewed him. He was a sort of young guy in early sort of years of his education. And he told me that he works on one of these larger platforms, Upwork, and he would not come out of his house, in this case, his room, 5 days in a row. The only time he would go out if he's using toilet breaks or getting food. He would stay at home. But for the last day, maybe Saturday or Sunday, he would then go out with his friend. And that is the story that we heard back in 2015 when I started doing this work, repeatedly across multiple countries. So the point I'm trying to make is, as much as people wouldn't realize how it is affecting badly, now we are able to hear from people like Kauna, Richard, and Mofat, it's actually affecting them far more than we actually previously imagined. So there is a logic, but also the exploitation might have changed in a slightly different dimensions, so to speak. To your point about fair work, I'm not going to comment on fair work, but I think your issue about are people developing movements, they certainly are. I think as much as the focus is on Kenya, if somebody goes and look at it in other countries, including in this country, in South Africa, you would find a lot more. And these things are happening, and in sociological literature, the concept of a structured antagonism is quite commonly used. Exploitation of through capital leads to workers being agitated. There is similar movement, not necessarily in data work, but in ride-hailing industry. It's a very similar thing in Kenya. It's the same thing in Uganda. If you go to Ghana, you're going to find the same thing. In Nigeria, it's the same thing. Kauna is one of them. It's the same thing in Ethiopia and in Egypt. I think as a researcher for us, it is our task to be able to look at some of these movements, to figure out what you described. What is it that's connecting them? But what is the internal politics that might be bifurcating them or kind of distributing their power in that sense? So yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Kauna, please.
Thank you, Dr. Amir and Adio, for that. I think they've answered most of the questions, but just to touch on even the skills, the entry skills, I think from my own experience, the skills is usually not really there, because they'll just ask if you can speak English, understand, read and write, because we've seen even colleagues of ours who are PhD holders, master's holders and all that, but they are paid the same. It doesn't matter, you get paid the same amount. Even if you've worked for 4 years, you'll be paid the same amount regardless of your qualification. So qualification doesn't really matter, I think, in this space. To answer the first question that was asked about 250 interviews that I will take. So given that the study have a clinical dimension, and also especially the trauma that is involved in the work, so the 250 interviews would enable me also to have to access the mental health trend with larger reliability and ethical sensitivity. Because when we look at the content moderation space, we have different BPOs, different time periods where the workers have worked, different languages, and for example, the guys who worked on the Ethiopian contents while the Tigray war was happening, and also it was different for the normal moderators who were doing contents, because we could see their mental health state deteriorated really faster than some of us who were doing what we call the normal content. But it wasn't normal, but not the war-related content where we see people, just like Amir, Adio had mentioned, would see their relatives. You know that, okay, this is where I lived, I grew up, being burned, my neighbors being slaughtered, fired, killed, and all that. So there are different moderators working with different languages and countries that they moderate, and also different types of contract. So we might be working in the same space, hired at the same time, but our contracts are totally different. So these are the things that I would have we are going to look into. And also the moderation platforms, because we have different moderation platforms. We have former and current content moderators. Just to give an example, because my focus would be on the mental health, because it's quite sensitive and it will require a whole lot of ethical things to look at. There's a research that we are currently doing aside different with the data inquiry, and we've realized that former moderators are experiencing more mental health trauma than the ones who are currently doing moderation. So this is just one of it. So it's expected normally that when you've left the job, you're no longer seeing contents, you should be healing and getting better. But now this reverse is the case, because now the ones who are not working are getting more traumatized and going through a lot mentally. So these are the things that I will consider.
Thank you so much. Before I open a second quick round, I abuse my chair with one comment and one question. The comment is a little bit about fair work. Gift and I actually have been studying this decent work initiatives and stuff like that in the publications of international organizations, and there I find it quite remarkable how a lot, even including to some degree the International Labour Organization, emulate the discourse of large tech companies. So you might know this idea of Schumpeterian creative destruction. You know, technology comes and it destroys a lot of jobs, but it will also magically instantiate new jobs. So this is kind of the grand bargain. It seems that both the tech company and actually also the international organizations are still willing to swallow. And so basically, on the tech side, this utopian vision would be called solutionism, right? So technology creates all these answers. And so I find it quite remarkable that even within ILO, you see lobbying from tech companies in what they are doing. So I find this quite unfortunate. We tabled a paper on this if you're interested, but actually my question was rather to whoever thinks is capable of answering that. Do you think there will be anytime soon automation in this process so that you no longer need human workers? Okay, then the question is answered itself. Thank you.
That's my opinion. I'm not
saying yeah. No, but I'll. So can we maybe have 3 questions and also quick answer, so if the questions can be quick.
I've been involved since the beginning of 2024 at the University of Stellenbosch with discussions regarding how to address ChatGPT, what kind of market there is for those trained in digital skills. And what I've heard today, and I'd like to say it is really important, most of it is completely new to me. So, and it's also completely new to the discussion that we've been having at Stellenbosch. I don't know whether this is also true at UCT. So in that sense, it is a really important discussion you're taking place. My question has to do with confidentiality. I mean, you mentioned NDR. I mean, NDR has got to do with confidentiality. You've got censorship. You've probably got question self-censorship among the subcontractors. And is there any pressure of censorship upon yourselves? That is, upon you having to be careful about what you say to whom and where. That's the question.
Very good point, yeah.
Yes, you see, it's going in the direction Simon was already talking about yesterday. How do the new jobs look like? And this is very shocking what you're presenting. The question is for me, I mean, it's going into this kind of how can you organize a group? And in the former days, there were trade unions. I mean, is there any kind of trade union which say this is ours? You mentioned the ILO and the international organization in this regard. And of course, the other question is when it comes to minimum salaries, the government is responsible in the different countries as well. And finally, on the side of the global north, of the minority, you see, we have supply chains regulations when it comes to working conditions in other countries, when it comes to textile industry, wherever. Why is this also applicable for this area? That's my question. I mean, can you force the big Meta, etc., to use this regulation to look for fair work?
That's fine.
If you allow me, I will collect 4 questions.
Yeah, it's fine, it's fine.
I also, yeah, my question would be very closely related to your question. But first of all, thanks for your very interesting presentations. So yeah, I was wondering, like, what you now think, like legislators, policymakers should do about it. As was just said, there's supply chain regulation in the north, and enforcement is difficult. So maybe you can comment on that. And then I was also thinking, I mean, a lot of these activities also in Kenya are taking place within a broader competitive environment, right? So my fear would be, let's say, for example, policymakers would highly regulate and try to enforce many of these laws that already exist in the industry in Kenya, then these global companies would just source from somewhere else, right? And so then all those jobs would be gone. So, and maybe Kauna can speak to that. That's probably not what you wish for. Probably you would just wish for better work, better regulated work, and decent work, right? So maybe you can speak to that trade-off. And just one comment. Amir, I found it striking that you've shown also that most of these individuals are pretty highly educated, right? So they have all diplomas, and this speaks to a huge opportunity cost, in my opinion, also that they do some of these very repetitive work where their skills could be applied much more beneficially in other areas, actually.
It is.
So one final question.
Thank you so much. You partly answered my question before I asked it when you said that it's impossible to automate this sector. The impression that I got yesterday, especially from Gaudenzia's presentation, was that the content that we see on especially social media platforms is filtered by algorithms, and that's what I believed. I wasn't aware that there are actually people behind the scenes who moderate the content. And now, is there room for these content moderators to use their own agents to determine now what content they promote? And yeah, what is the link between this algorithmic filtering and content moderation by the content creators? Because I thought maybe it ended on algorithmic filtration. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, please, whoever wants to go first. Who wants to go first this time?
This time I will go first.
Okay.
So we're just having a little chat with Amir here that there are some questions I would love to have him take because I feel like he can explain them better than I can. So the question I'll speak about is, I think the first question that came from, I think, Simon, about our own sense of safety, security. I've received the same question from my family, actually, that are you safe? Especially as I start speaking more and more about this, and they're asking, are you not afraid that big tech might take you out? The question is, in a way, I am, actually. I need to be realistic. But I think at the bottom of it, which is why we try to talk about workers more, I think to try and speak about my own safety and not the safety of people who are actually being harmed, in a way, I feel like it's me sensationalizing the issue. So I would rather speak of how I feel like this is more debilitating to the workers than it is for me as an academic, as a researcher, because to some extent, I have certain privileges and certain securities that they don't have. I have a salary, so I'm at a pretty good position within Germany, and which means to some extent, I have much more protections legally, and also I can afford legal help. However, to make sure that we are airtight and ironclad in our safety, we also engaged the services of lawyers whenever we publish whatever we have on our workers' inquiry. So after Kauna is done with the inquiry, it will pass through some legal scrutiny checks to make sure that no one will sue us for defamation or some other funny clauses. But however, I also look forward to being sued by Meta or any of these guys, because maybe that's my big break, you know, because I have damning evidence. Then on the issue that my dear neighbor from Munster mentioned about governments being responsible for the salaries and the minimum wages, to an extent I agree, but I think my question is also that I think once we involve government, we're talking of what's legal. So then once we move to what's legal, there's the question of what's moral, and which then becomes the problem. Of course, there are no morals in capitalism, and these companies specifically exploit these conditions in these countries because they know that the governments will anyway side with them. But I think drawing from the same logics that I was using in my paper of how this is all colonialism, I would say colonialism itself was legal. So maybe we need to move it beyond placing the responsibility on the governments, because clearly they failed us. So let's put the responsibility on these companies, on these organizations. And how do we do this? There are a number of ways we can do it. For example, when we watch movies, there's always this sign that flashes by that no animals were harmed during the production, right? And when we buy jewelry, we make sure there's not blood diamonds. So perhaps maybe at an individual level, before we use these tools, we need to make sure that no Kaunas were harmed in the moderation of this content. no people were harmed. Maybe this is what we can do. But of course, I understand that revolutions cannot really be driven by these piecemeal individual changes, but the systematic or systemic changes. So maybe let's write to our political representatives in whatever jurisdictions we have, because most of these companies are based in the global north anyway. So perhaps it's time we use the privilege we have of being able to actually influence policy change from those companies. Sama is based in San Francisco, and I'm happy that part of my work was helping a couple of US senators actually come up with bills. This was before Elon Musk became president. Sorry, I mean Trump. So back then there was more hope that this was happening, and I think this is what we can do, because some of the companies, like I said, are based in Germany, who are doing this work, who are employing these people. So perhaps maybe if we place pressure from our individual countries using our privilege, then maybe change can happen. The next question I'll answer is, okay, actually, maybe let me leave others to speak.
Go for it. You're speaking really well.
I think there was the issue of which you mentioned, that workers, that these might move away from Kenya, which is why the argument that I always make is always about not focusing it on geographical locations like Kenya, but making it much bigger, making it a more holistic approach to fixing these issues. So we need these the reforms that we're talking about not to be directed at individual countries, because these companies have already shown that they have a propensity to jump ship. So Majorel was operating content moderation unit in Berlin, and when workers took them to court and won the case, they are now based in Casablanca, Morocco. And when workers in Kenya sued them in Kenya, they moved to Accra. And in Accra, right now, we are busy trying to locate workers there. It's highly secretive, and also the workers there are even more exploited than the ones in Kenya. So the move has to be at a global front. I would like to hopefully believe the African Union, for example, can apply this pressure, but hey, hope.
In terms of confidentiality, yes, there is a confidentiality thing. I mean, we wrote the book, The Digital Continent, and we couldn't mention the firm because we had access to the firm, both in Kenya and Uganda, but we couldn't name them when we were discussing it. So we didn't, but now I can because I'm not working with them. So which is what I'm doing. But yeah, I think you've covered the issue about the risk that we're taking. There is a risk, but compared to the risk that people like Kauna and other people are taking, it isn't as much. But yeah, we should be careful with what we're trying to say, because that would harm our reputation to be even in the location to do our work. To your point about what pressure could be, there is a regulatory pressure. The problem is, if you look at the political economy of the region and the continent, there is an intense pressure on the government for creation of jobs. So the pressure is, do we regulate or do we throw these firms out? It had happened before. In 2008, 9, 10, up to 11, there were major international call centers operating in Kenya, and they left in 2012 and 13. So by the time I was doing work in 2015, vast majority of them were gone. And the reason they were gone was the government was trying to institute minimum wage laws for the call centers. Guess where they went? India and Philippines. Guess where they went? Some of them moved to Ghana, neighboring countries like Uganda, Tanzania, South Africa, and elsewhere. So there is that kind of a push that these jobs are going to go away. And part of the reason is, that's why when I asked the question earlier, how do we build an alternative or a world without digital, it wasn't to throw these tools away. It was to think for strategies that are wider in terms of what kind of development potential we could talk about from the work point of view. And my sort of concern is, we shouldn't necessarily be focusing that this digital work is the savior of unemployment and inequality issue on the continent. The work that we need to be created that is actually more sticky, that sticks around. Is there an industrialization strategy that could be revived? People talk about it isn't the case, but it is one of the more important and more effective one to think about. So I don't necessarily see the kind of digital work that are emerging to be used as a leverage or a tool from an economic development point of view, in this case, workers' improvement or labor market improvement. There were two other points. Remind me, sorry? Oh yeah, the automation, right? So 2 points. I don't necessarily think automation is going to completely take off, in a sense, completely remove this, as much as people would hope. There is an interesting book, Fully Luxury Automated Communism. I think if you have not read it, I think by Aaron Benenev or Aaron Bastani, sorry, I'm confused with the name, but that's the hope they want to get there. But that's not necessarily the case. The more advanced the tools become, the more kind of new forms of training or new forms of work are going to be emerging. And that has already been the case historically speaking. Just because cars developed in some parts of the world doesn't mean it removes the work, it fully automated it, other kinds of work emerge, which is what the discussion was. It is about what kind of work is actually emerging in terms of quality. So that's one thing. Did I miss anything? Algorithmic bias. So when workers are doing the work at a firm level, in this case SAMA or Teleperformance or CCI, they don't have that agency to use some of these AI tools. Plus, thinking about leveraging some of these tools to moderate content, it's extremely expensive, right? But if they are working individually, there are cases where content moderation might not be done by these AI tools or robots, in layman's term, but other kinds of work have already been done by workers themselves by using AI tools. Case in point, article writing. See the articles or content that is being generated on the internet on different kinds of websites. A vast majority of them is now being produced through things like large language models like ChatGPT. In 2022, when ChatGPT arrived, a couple of years before, there was a discussion among the workers, because I've been in touch with these people for about 10, 12 years now. There was discussion among article writers, both in Kenya and in Ghana, that they're seeing an increasing dip in the work that is available through labor platforms like Upwork. And immediately after the launch of the ChatGPT, that work dried up. Because the work that was coming and filtered through these people, they could be done by other kinds of robots, so to speak. So.
Wonderful. So last words go to Kauna, please.
All right. The issue of automation, I would speak from experience. I think big tech would always say, we don't need human moderators, but from our 4X experience, I'd say they would always need human moderation. Reason being, humans also evolve in behavior and all that. So people keep what was posted last year in an A pattern. This year might be an X pattern, a Gen Z pattern, and all that. So contents will always change, and hence the algorithm we've taught in 2019 has evolved in 2025. So does that mean we're going to use the same policy, the same pattern of taking it down? No. You have to keep changing the policies, we have to keep upgrading the policies, and hence the algorithm also need to be taught the new things. And who teaches the algorithm? It's the humans who are moderators. So the reason why we keep seeing contents these days, people keep saying, no, Facebook don't take down content, TikTok doesn't, is because they are reducing their human moderation, and hence they're not updating the algorithm with new patterns. I will not go deep into that, but we've seen how these things work. Humans can put like the word kill. In 2019, when we started working, if 4 moderators pick kill for a certain content, in the coming weeks, it doesn't come to us. It's automatically deleted by the AI system, because we've taught it that once you've seen this particular word, it's bad, you take it down. But humans evolved in the coming years. We see where they put K, an asterisk, 2 asterisks, and put L. As a human, when I read the sentence, I already know that's a kill. But now the algorithm doesn't know, what word is that? It's okay, it let it go. And then we had millions and billions of appeals by the time we're living in 2023 because of this evolution, or that word. Because of that, people keep evolving and changing those words to escape the algorithm. So that will keep happening. The issue of confidentiality, like you've said, the NDAs, for us who are in the forefront, doing advocacy and the work, it's been tough. I would say it's not easy. even with us being in court, some of us as petitioners and all that, we still experience threats in different ways. Like for me, there are places I don't go. There are things like currently, Dr. Amir was just here a few weeks ago and we were having that conversation. A few weeks, it's been difficult even for me because I've been receiving threats from these companies, threatening me with so many things, which I would not discuss in details, but it shows that we are also constantly under risk as we try to talk about the situation. And then even the lawsuits, like Adio had said, I myself, not even in Kenya and Nigeria, I have 2 lawsuits that has been filed against me just because of the work that I do. So these are things that comes with the work. And yet as a worker, you might not have the full legal protection. You have to reach out to people who would help. Okay, this came up, they need to help. And then it constantly also put the other moderators in fear, because the first thing when we're doing advocacy, our colleagues would tell us, you can end up dead, these guys can just take you out and all that. But looking at what we've gone through and still going through, you ask yourself, what next? Like, what next? And other people will still go through worse than what we have gone through. So people like us have to speak up regardless of how it feels. But as we are here in this room, it's just for us also to think about how workers also protected as they speak out, because I've seen, we talk about the issues, but there's no clear platform or places where workers can run through when they're doing this advocacy and activism work and they fall into such legal battles that they didn't even bargain for. And it's also try to silence the voice of the workers. The question around regulatory pressure, this is one thing that we've also been doing in Kenya. And it's also one of the things that have put us at risk because, as Adio have said, the president clearly stated that no one can sue SAMA again. So now you're fighting against the government. It seems like you're fighting against the government and also the companies that you've worked for, and hence you have no protection. For petitioners in Kenya who don't have any work permits and all that, the court clearly stated that they are protected under the law because of the petition going on. But I tell you, many of our colleagues have been arrested and they were in jail for some time, regardless of even the law, the court orders that clearly stated that we are in this country because of our case. So these are the issues that it's barely talked about, but it's actively going on. And we were just in the court the other day and it has been moved to October. So our next hearing date is in October, from July to October. So you can imagine it keeps dragging. That means workers will keep getting exposed and being subjected to so many things while waiting for the court case to go. And of course, the companies will keep moving. Just like Adio had said, they will move and move and move. So it's also to look at it in a very big, the bigger picture of Africa as a continent, because moving, you can't stop them from moving. But what does that mean? It means that workers keep getting exploited in every other country that they move to. If it's hot in Kenya, we move to Ghana. I'm sure once there's any court case, blah, 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 in Ghana, they are also going to move. They are currently in Nigeria, very low in Nigeria, doing the work. And we're trying also to see what we can do from that side. So you can see the movement is there, but in a very secretive way because of the NDAs. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So thanks to all the 3 speakers and to Kauna also for her bravery. That is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks very much for this incredible, mind-blowing panel. Unfassbar, I would call it in German, but yeah. So now we have a break, but we're also first going to do a photo in the inner courtyard on the right here, sort of a family photo to prove we were all here. Also, because this is the 100th Point Sud event, so it's kind of a historic occasion for Point Sud as well. So we'll just head out to the courtyard on that side and do a photo.